Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here again with our guest host, Linda Pham, and we thought we'd have a discussion on money, more importantly, salary negotiation. So for those of you who are in the job search and you happen to land a role, land an offer, sometimes the topic comes up is like, well, should I negotiate my salary? So we thought we'd have an interesting discussion and kind of talk a little bit about do's and don'ts and things like that. So we'll have the conversation. Now I want to start off a little bit where I don't really like the term kind of salary negotiation, right? Because generally in a negotiation, there's some one side can give more or take more, right? But if you're a person that is on the job and you got selected for the role, like what are you negotiating? You can't actually like do more or say, well, I was actually going to only start working at like 80%, but now I'm going to work at 100% if you give me more money. So I would prefer to talk a little bit more about like realigning value or like the understanding like the data set, because sometimes the company doesn't know what the market value is, and they might just need a little more information or based on your education or circumstances, things like that. So that's one thing that I want to caveat. What about your thoughts? Are any kind of like initial thoughts that you'd have in terms of like salary negotiation or the discussion of what the starting salary might be?
God, you should always give it 100%.
For sure.
I think when it comes to salary negotiation, it's an open conversation. It's a two-way street. Like you want to find what fits for you. You also want to ensure that you're being paid what you're worth.
Mhm.
Although your net worth doesn't always equal to your self-worth, right? Don't tie your identity by how much you make. But I think in terms of how much you give, in the first conversation, I think that's when you should actually try to reach the highest amount for your salary negotiation, because later on when you're in a company, your increases are going to be quite incremental. There's that normal regular merit increase, and it's going to be a little bit harder to display, that bigger jump because, all right, I guess first secret is that the company needs to, I guess, display some savings, and that's why they're giving you more opportunities through growth. And so when it does come to negotiating, I like the word negotiations. I think it can be a win-win situation for both.
Mhm.
It's just I do understand for the employer and the company side that we do have a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more insights. So you might feel like you're at a disadvantage, but that's why research is so important. And I think there is a lot of information out there so that you can prep well when it comes to negotiating.
Mhm. And you talked about knowing your worth. So that obviously talks about what you just said about research and going out there and figuring that out. But how does one do that, right? So does someone go on like one of those anonymous sites, like the LinkedIn, Glassdoor, pay scale ones, and just search for like salary for whatever my role is in that industry and stuff like that? And should I rely on that as a source, or would there be a different way that you'd encourage folks to look at?
Yeah, I think the regular websites like PayScale, Glassdoor is pretty good because that's normally self-reported. So it is someone who's like, this is what I am making at this time. But the way, like, it's also interesting to look at what the industry offers, because the way jobs are measured and scaled, it's actually a system that's developed and it's mainly used in North America and Europe. It's called the Hayes method. There are different methods out there, but it really looks at your skill, your effort, responsibilities, and working conditions. And then there's also challenges with location as well. Like if your skill set's a little bit more scarce, then they might hire more for that region. But I think also with the challenge of remote working, it's also easier to get roles in different places. But it is a good place to look at. And I think also if you're looking at a job description and you're sort of looking like, oh, how many points can I do in this job? Like I've done it before. Yeah, I think if I jumped into this, this is pretty good. As opposed to looking at that and you're like, oh, I haven't had the exact experience to do this, but I know that if I was given the opportunity, I could do well. And then if an entry level person was looking at a CEO job and they're like, yeah, I can do it. I'll be like, okay, let's reset your expectations. So I think at least, contrasting what you can't do as opposed to like, hey, okay, you know what? I've done something in the past that I think I can do this. So yeah, I think I'm a little bit rambling here, but looking online, so sources are good, looking at the job description, seeing how like reevaluating your ability. Have you done something in the past? And if you were given the opportunity, how comfortable do you feel taking that challenge? And then just the market research where you start finding like certain numbers at an average range
Mhm.
and just making sure that's aligned with the industry because certain industries might pay a little bit more and there's I guess standards. There's like leading the market, lagging the market, and just matching the market. Most
Sure.
companies obviously match. And then if you're Google, you might be leading. So yeah, just doing yeah, Google is your best friend. Like you could do a lot of search. I mean, sorry, there's also Bing and Yahoo. I don't know who else uses
Sure. Yeah.
those search engines, but yeah, there's a lot of research out there. And also, I think another interesting one to get salary is unconventional, but if you were interviewing for a bunch of jobs and start getting the numbers of the different ranges and the recruiter discloses that to you, you can find where the average kind of lies
Mhm.
around. So sneaky your way, but still getting the data, right?
For sure. So what I heard is as you start out your journey and you have no idea, you have no numbers, Google's going to be a good place to start. So like you said, PayScale, Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and all that sort of stuff. And you'll find numbers. Some of them will be aligned, some of them will be a little off. And then what you need to do is kind of color that with your particular situation, right? So if you're kind of new to the role and just kind of career switching or new grad or something like that, you're going to be more on the lower end than the average or the higher end, right? If you're going to like a location and as you said, it's a little bit more scarce and things like that, maybe you'll ask for more the higher, even though you might have kind of the less experience or what have you. And then obviously you're going to have to take into consideration like the cost of living and stuff like that, right? So
Yeah.
in different metropolitan areas versus a more rural area or suburban area, then the cost might be a little bit different. And depending, as you said, about like leading or laggard or at the market, some companies pay more, some people pay less. So just kind of take all those. So it sounds like it's not an exact science. And where it gets a little bit more exact is when you get those ranges from the interviews, because that's kind of like an actual data point versus kind of these anonymous sites. So one thing that I want to ask is, and this is a pretty common question, is in the interview, the recruiter asks, what's your salary expectation? Are you for or against providing a number? Because I've heard some people want to dodge the questions like, well, at market rates and things like that. As a recruiter, I've heard is like, well, that's a horrible thing because I want to know whether or not you're even in the ballpark, that sort of thing. What are kind of your thoughts and guidance about kind of giving the first number?
Ooh. So I'm very transparent when it comes to the range. I'm actually like how and it's actually like it's like poker. Like you're sort of bluffing. Like, who wants to give the first number?
Right.
Um, I don't speak for all recruiters. I speak from my experience, but I give the range because I just like being transparent about it
Mm,
and sort of be like, is this within your budget? And I've had some candidates that are a little bit hesitant on sharing. They'll give the standard, oh, like I'd love to speak about my salary once we get to the final stages.
right.
And for me, I'm like, I need to know a number. So I might say, well, let's speed up the process. If we do get there, I just kind of know, I want to know a ballpark number to work with, right? And until someone budges, is what I can work with, right? So I think it's important that someone doesn't tell me what they're making because you should really be looking at the market. Because when someone's like, oh, well, this is what I'm making right now, and that expectation of what the market is now, it's like you should really know what you're worth because your skill set is now more rare and now you're just telling me you might have been with the company that starts on the lower end as opposed to the market rate. So
Mhm.
um I think it is I guess it's important to give a number and then I think you can outright just ask the recruiter what is the range for this role? Depending on the recruiter, like myself, I will share that. If there are recruiters who might say, I don't know the range. I don't really believe that because I don't think they know what to recruit for. It is a way to eliminate candidates if it is something that might seem out of reach or just shows that that person didn't do their research. So I think it's okay to ask questions and be like, well, this is the research I did, and it might be different depending on the industry or what I found online. Is that a match, right? Having that conversation to check. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think don't try not to be the first to throw the number out there. You can try to ask, but if the recruiter is kind of pushy like me, give a number and you can confirm is that within your budget, or ask for something that's really high and be like, is this above your range? Because I would tell the candidate then that this is actually what we have budgeted for the role. Is that okay with you? And if they say yes, I'm like, okay, cool. Because now you've confirmed you're okay with that
Sounds
number.
good. So it sounds like a little bit of a dance. That
Yes.
sounds like step one. If you can ask them for their range, you might luck out, and the recruiter is quite transparent and they give you it. And if that fails, well, hopefully you have your research there, and it's up to you and how long you want to kind of dodge the question or defer it in terms of that versus giving you your range. And it sounds like one tactic is going really high, but I guess it always depends on the particular situation, right? For there are some folks who are like new grads, they're looking to break into whatever, they'll just take whatever they can get,
Mhm.
right? Versus, you know what, I've been working for a couple of years, I'm at the market, maybe a little below market, so I want to at least add 10%, 20%, whatever it is to what I'm making right now, assuming that's within the market range, or if the
Mhm.
market range is way higher, then I'll definitely want to do something to that effect.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, recruiters like leaving with a number or a range for them to make sure that it's worth their time. Because if someone is whatever 50 to 70K and you only have 40K in the budget, well,
Mhm.
that's a mismatch, right? And
Mhm.
what would you say about the kind of folks that are kind of trying to take advantage of folks and say, you know what, they gave me a range of 50 to 70, but my budget is actually 60 to 100, right?
Mhm.
How many of them will actually, I guess, give the top of the range versus the bottom of the range, or whatever? What do you think that the psychology is around that?
I don't think it's fair if someone does give a lower end of the range and we know that this is what they're worth, because chances are if we ended up underpaying them and they did really, really well and then they found out that they were being underpaid, that would make them really upset. And then, like I mentioned earlier, to get that increase later on is quite challenging. So that person who's performing super well is likely going to leave. So I would just pay them what they're worth in terms of the market. And when
Mhm.
we do place the employee is based on experience. So if they are coming in with a high skill set and we know that they can get the ground running and they've mentioned that, yeah, they've done a similar job in a similar industry, can get their ground running, showcase a lot of ideas and supporting information, I would put them on the higher end, but also be transparent that, hey, because your pay is starting a little bit higher when it does come to your next increase, like you're either going to be at that next level ready for your promotion, and it might be in that team's plan to look at it like, hey, they're actually going to be ready within 6 months to a year, and we have a role that we're going to promote them readily into, and that's where your increase can be a little bit higher. But if they do start at the higher end and then it comes to review time, there's no role, it's going to be a shorter increase than it would be when we place them. So typically when there is a range, like it's that midpoint that we are trying to aim for. So if the range
Mhm.
is between like 60 to 80, then 70 is the middle number. And then you kind of move up from there, right? If someone is on the lower end, it's because we know that they have a lot of potential, but there is a lot of room for growth. And so we'll place them in that sense. So I think it's fair when we are rating and it's, yeah, relevant to experience. And it is interesting because you're gonna have peers who have the same role, and as much as I don't condone this, it is a good way to also find out salary to speak to your peers who do that role similarly,
Right.
right? And if someone goes, "Oh my god, like John Doe is being paid higher than she is, why is that the case?" They're gonna get upset, but we did factor in that John might have more experience than
Mhm.
you did, and so I think with that it's fair, but also know that there are a lot of factors that were considered when we're trying to, I guess, price the candidate.
For sure. In some other conversations I've had with other recruiters or HR professionals, the discussion went into things like, well, a higher salary or being higher on the salary range also indicates more expectations and responsibility, right? So if in your example, you're 60 to 80, right? If I'm hiring someone at 60, there's going to be different expectations for someone I'm hiring the same role at 80, right? Because I expect them to, as you said, like kind of hit the ground running because they're able to do so. When they're on the 60 range, I might forgive them a little bit more because they might take a little longer, right? So depending on how you roll, because you might want a more high pressure situation where you're ready to kind of hit the ground running and work the extra hours and just make sure that stuff gets done versus, you know what, I kind of want to ease in the transition and make sure it's comfortable and all that sort of stuff. So sometimes more money is not necessarily a good thing. So just be aware that a higher price tag also indicates higher expectations.
More money, more problems.
More money, more problems, for sure. What are your thoughts on things like base comp versus total comp? Because a lot of folks are focused on salary, right? What is my base salary? And that's a big thing. But there are things like bonuses, signing bonuses, and a whole bunch of perks like paid for cell phones and this and that. And I think some companies are doing like allowances for like work and stuff like that. So either like a remote working, like a what is it, like a WeWork type of setup or whatever. What are your thoughts on how to take into consider like all your total comp versus just the base salary?
Total comp is really important. I think it's individual, like it's based on that, like it's very subjective. And I think that when negotiating your salary, like people are talking about the base, but if the recruiter says, this is what we have budgeted and this is where the base is, this is where you can use that opportunity to get those extra little perks and comps. So whether it's more vacation days or a signing bonus, because sometimes, you know, you're leaving your company at a time where your bonus payout should have been paid out in March. And because you're leaving, you can get that one-time bonus. So a lot of people don't know that, and you can actually have that negotiated. Like for myself, I love remote working. I would probably take a job that is more of a hybrid flex model, remote working, as opposed to having to be in office because you have to commute, having that freedom. Yeah, so it is something that I considered. I know that some people probably do like being in the office. They just want that people interaction. But yeah, it's definitely a holistic thing to consider. Like you could be paid a lot higher, but maybe the work culture isn't as great. You're going to be miserable for 2 years and grinding, and you're thinking, like, why did I do this to myself? As opposed to a place where it might be a bit lower in pay, but you're getting that growth from your mentors and you like the people that you're working with and you get free lunches here and there and nice bonuses. So I think people should consider the total comp perspective for sure.
For sure. And as you said, it's really a subjective thing where what's important to you. You want to think about things like remote work, benefits packages that some companies might pay for, like continuing education, like an MBA or whatever it is. And like a question that I've had with some folks, would you rather get paid 10K more or have a shorter or no commute, right? Because like time on the public transit, on the highway or whatever, like half an hour each way, that sort of thing adds up over time. Is that worth an extra 5K, 10K, 50K, right? You're going to have to figure out what that number is for you specifically. And it's probably going to change in your life situation too. So if you're single and have fewer dependents and less commitments and stuff like that, it might not matter because you're trying to optimize the salary part. But if you want to get home to the kids, the family, to the whatever things that you have, then other things might be more important. But I think that's good. Good insight. So what are some other like do's and don'ts that you'd have for folks out there who are in the kind of salary negotiation world? So maybe we'll start with the don'ts, like the things that really kind of annoy you and piss you off as a recruiter when someone does this in the salary negotiation part of the recruiting side. What are some of the don'ts that you'd have people avoid?
Like I mentioned earlier, don't tell me that you are making XYZ right now, because like now we'll know what you'll be happy with. And I think then depending on the company you work for, like the hiring manager might take advantage of it. And I want you to be happy with the number you get and where you're working and the experience. I also don't like if someone tries to make it like a joke, like, haha, like I'm ready for that 80K. Like, no, don't do that right now. What do you think? Things that you shouldn't do or don't do. I'm blanking out right now.
Are there any like pet peeves or things that when they're in the process that it kind of irks you or annoys you? So maybe it's not a don't, but like this is not a good way to get on someone's good side.
I think more for do is just do your research and make sure that when you're trying to negotiate your point that you have supporting evidence as to why, but also stick to your guns. So I recently actually, I recruit for a lot of sales peeps, and sales, if you're in sales, you're negotiating. So it makes my job a little bit tougher, but
Sure.
it is a good challenge. And I knew what we had budgeted for the role, and he had asked for like 75 to 85, right? And we were aiming for 72, and he constantly kept pushing for the conversation, which is good. I don't mind that. I think it's good that he did that. So let's do. And so he was supporting like, hi, I can bring in this information. I have this year's this much experience. I've hit President's Club in my first year, and that's really rare. And I was like, these are really good points. But during the interview process, he had areas where a lot of the team had identified this is a growth area. He's not quite there yet. We've been in this role, so we know what we're looking for. And if someone was asking, this was their range, and he kept slipping back, kind of lowering his number, and we knew that our company was his first choice. I had a little bit more leeway. It's almost like playing poker, like I was saying. Like I knew he was bluffing because I was like, okay, if you had something ready, you could have just left, but you're still around. You've waited this long for an offer from us. You're still trying to work things through. And so I was able to get actually the number that I was trying to pay him. So he pushed for it, but I think it was kind of like, oh, you're really bending backwards just for us. So I would say stick to your guns when it comes to a certain number that you are aiming for. Also, if you're trying to target a certain number and you're giving your range, so if I'm trying to get paid at 65 and my range, I wouldn't say it's like 60 to 70. I would start my minimum as like 65 and go upward. So that way, like at least you go in with what you're kind of trying to do. Ooh, I just remembered a don't. Okay.
Sure.
So a don't is when you're negotiating, like know what you're willing to take and what you're willing to walk away from. Because if a company gives you a really good offer and you're negotiating back and forth, like chances are we chose you because you're the ideal candidate. We really
Sure.
want you. And now we just want to make sure you're happy. And I've had a horror story where this new grad, like relatively new, I think a couple of years out of her career, kept pushing for more. And she was being paid like at the highest amount, the highest bonus that they could give her. And she wanted even more. So she kept pushing for that. The team wasn't having it. They rescinded the offer. That's the worst case scenario. It's like you tried too much and now you don't have a job. And then she emailed back saying, hey, actually, I want to accept this, but it's too late now. You pushed too hard. So know what you're worth and know that this is actually an alignment. If you get better than what you're worth, then take it. Like, because you're gonna have to know like what makes sense for you. And so if you push a little bit too much, you might upset the team. So it's a balancing act, right? So if you're willing to take that risk and know that this could happen, evaluate all your options because that could happen. It's rare, but I mean, she had her offer rescinded. So just be realistic.
Sounds good. So what I took from that, so some of the don'ts are like, well, I guess a question like the question of the salary. can you dodge it? Should you dodge it? So someone like you who's a little bit more transparent, but let's say I encounter a recruiter that's not so transparent, and they're pushing for a question, but you said like I don't want to give the first number, like, and they keep insisting and keep insisting. Do I keep insisting as well, and see who kind of plays chicken first, or do I actually bite the bullet and give them a number because this is the research that I did and I'm comfortable with that? What's your thoughts on that?
I think if you've done enough research, then you can give that first number and then just confirm with the recruiter, like, hey, so this is what I found in my market research. Just wanted to make sure, like, is that in a line? Does that make sense? And then if the recruiter says, okay, yeah, that sounds good with me. Sometimes they just might say, okay, every recruiter style is different. I think it is okay to give a number that because you've done your research on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And it sounds like from a don't perspective, focus more on what the market is and all that versus what you're making, because it sounds like oh, I'm making this that has no bearing necessarily on what this role or what the market will bear and all that sort of stuff. So hopefully there's some alignment in there. And from your other example is probably don't be too greedy in the sense that if she was pushing, but she was willing to take another one, like, I mean, that's kind of like trying to take advantage. And now there's a very thin line between that, because I'm sure in that process, she had her range and you're probably on the high end of her range, and yet she was asking for more, but she was willing to take it. It's one of those things where you have to be mindful of that. There's another side to the negotiation as well, and sometimes your offers can be rescinded as well. And then what I heard for the do's are like the definitely do your research, right? You want to start with the range as your minimum of what you want. So don't put it in the middle, put it as the starting part. Get data, and if not through like the anonymous sites, but through like the interactions through the interview process, you'll probably through the different folks that you're getting offers from will be able to kind of triangulate the range that's there. And yeah, you have to kind of stick to your guns. So if you have a number that you want and you believe that is the market rate, then keep going, because you can push and potentially get it. And that's probably on both sides as well. So yeah, I think that's a lot of great discussions. I know for some folks, they have this consideration of like hopping around to get more money. So oftentimes with like the big four firms or the big five banks or the whatever, like moving from bank to bank to like firm to firm, that sort of thing, you tend to get a 10-20% jump each time. So every couple of years. What are your thoughts around that?
It is the best way to get a larger increase for sure. And I actually wish I did that earlier in my career. Like, I was fortunate to get a lot of growth, and I guess it looks good in terms of loyalty and staying in a company. But with the millennials and Gen Z, I think they're aware of that if you jump around, and it's also a good way to get experience and growth. That is how you increase your salary, and you do get to learn a lot. So yeah, I agree. And sometimes, so in my last company, I knew there was certain times of how an increase worked. So there's your annual merit raise. There's also a promotion in terms of if there's a role vacancy and you jump in, that's also a way to increase your salary. The other way is a counter. So say I'm trying to job hop, or I'm not happy with where I'm at, and then I get an offer somewhere, and then you give your resignation to the employer, but they realize you're quite valuable. How about we match your offer? How about we give you a little bit more? And being in HR, I knew that that was one of the tricks to get my increase. So I took it. But when you take that, you have to consider that you don't want to burn a bridge. And so you should probably stay another couple months. Unfortunately, in that industry, it was common for people to get the counter and then get an offer elsewhere. So it's like a nice temporary increase, and then they just still leave, right? They're not obliged, you still get the notice. So it is a way to get money. I do, I mean, because I did it, I guess I condone that behavior, but yeah, that is a consideration as well. But then if you don't want to burn bridges, like, know that if you do accept that, you should at least stay and try to stay in that role, because that means the company invested in you. But a lot of the times it's too late. It's kind of like you're doing that because you have one foot out. You're looking to leave, and how much will that counter be worth to you? So the reason why I took that counter is because I wasn't excited about the other company I was interviewing for. And then until I actually got something that I really, really want to work for, the increase was a lot higher. I was like, okay, you can't retain me. Like, there's nothing you can do to make me stay. And a lot of the times, that employee is already feeling that way. They're like, yeah, I'm already checked out. So this is a nice way to get my increase up.
For sure. So a couple of other perspectives based on my experiences, like definitely hopping around is probably a great way to get more money. But when having some discussions with some other folks is generally to kind of walk across the street, so to speak, to go to a competitor or whatever. The 10 or 20% is obligatory, mainly because that premium is what's called goodwill, right? Because in that company, the year, the 2 years or whatever that you spent there, you've probably did a lot of favors, built a lot of relationships and things like that. So that in order for me to move, well, I need to at least get paid for some of that, right? But because when you start with a new company, they have no idea who you are. No favors are necessarily pending for you because I don't know if you're any good. I don't necessarily want to trust you in this and that. Now, it depends on the culture and all that sort of stuff. But with previous, where you actually stayed extra weekends or like did this and that or whatever it is, then they know for sure that they kind of quote unquote owe you, right? So that's kind of what that 10-20% is. And at some point, like there's going to be a ceiling where like, well, if you don't have the substance and the learning behind it, just be aware of it. So moving for moving's sake is different than moving for the learning and the experience and all that sort of stuff. That should be paid for. The movement just because you have to be mindful of that. And on the topic of the counter, right? So I think your situation is slightly different where you really wanted the counter more than you wanted the other opportunity. So in that case, that's more kind of a negotiating tactic. But I'm pretty adverse to taking counters because if you're already 1 foot out the door, right, like they're just bribing you, right, to stay, right? Now, maybe if you're trying to optimize for money, that's a good thing. But all the other reasons why you were thinking of leaving are probably going to still be there and all that sort of stuff. So you might as well find that good opportunity, the good enough, the great opportunity that's out there and not take the offer, right? So if you're committed to going, go. But in your case, if you were really trying to optimize the salary or the funds, that's a different one. Great. So I think that this is a lot of food for thought for folks that are in that salary negotiation process. So making sure that you go out and do your research is kind of the most important part. And then following some of the guidance and advice. And every context is slightly dependent based on where you are. So you're going to have to think through it. And maybe you can have an HR friend where you can kind of use as a sounding board to kind of say, okay, hey, am I approaching this the right way? And yeah, any other parting words or thoughts that you want to have on the discussion for salary negotiation?
I think in terms of research, there were two sources that I didn't mention. Like I know PayScale, Glassdoor, LinkedIn are pretty good, and you'll find that some companies or usually public organizations post their salary, and then people might be like, why doesn't everyone post their salary? It is still a touchy subject. There are some states in the US that actually have it as a law that it's posted. So it actually makes things a lot easier when we do talk about the job because they already know what's expected. And then it also does weed out people who just don't read the job description because I'm like, did you not read this when we were setting up a call? So there's that as well. But yeah, for tech roles, there's actually a website called level.fyi, and it's really good in terms of finding what pay is in tech industries for different jobs. So Microsoft, Amazon, that's all out there. And then there's also RepVue, so REPVUE, that's for sales. So I guess I'm saying this because I recruit in tech and in sales. So this is an interesting source that I think not a lot of people know. And also, so I mentioned Hayes is that way that we benchmark jobs. There is a Hayes recruitment website, and if you download their book, they actually have every year they update what the market is and what the range is for that role. And it's nice. Like for me, I'm checking too. I'm like, am I getting paid what I'm worth? So yeah, it's a really cool resource for different industries. There's one I've seen in accounting, engineering, construction. So yeah, The interweb is your best friend.
Sounds good. Yeah. So those are new sites to me. So thanks so much for sharing. And I'm
Yeah,
sure
no
that there will be more and more that develop. And if you're a listener and have other resources to share, then feel free to comment and reach out to us to share those resources. But thanks so much, Linda, for having the conversation. And hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode.
So thanks, Luki.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.